The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. Well, welcome to the show, everybody. I want to let everyone know this is a live call-in show. Call in 343-9927, 343-9927 to voice your opinions, ask questions, dispute something that one of us may say, or for any other reason. The only rules being that you be respectful and as calm as you can be. 343-927, sorry. 343-9967. Oh, I'll get myself turned around here. 343-9927. There we go. Whew. All right, anyway, tonight we're going to talk about the recent school walkout for in opposition of gun violence in our high schools. Just in case you aren't aware of it, that's been happening a lot and too much lately. Recently, most recent one was the February 17th or 14th, 14th at the Parkland, the high school in Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And as a result, a month later, students all over the country in high schools walked out of school in the middle of the day and held rallies, gay speeches, and whatnot on March 14th. And with me tonight are two of the leading troublemakers here in Baton Rouge. Annie Sheehan Dean. Good evening, Annie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Anton Guevara West. Anton.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. And you participated, and actually you organized, you said, the walkout and the rally at Baton Rouge Magnet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. I mean, how much communication was there between you and the kids in Parkland, if any, leading up to that? So how did all this stuff get? Don't just shake your head. Tell me no or yes or no. But no or.
Well, we didn't really have any direct contact with the people of Parkland or any of the national people. Yet we were kind of more inspired by like the people around us. My friend Charlie at Lee High School, he put out a little poster by the Louisiana High School Democrats that was advocating for a walkout, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Something like this needs to happen. Some sort of change needs to happen. So I reached out to my friend Allison, and Allison met up with Reagan, and Annie got brought in, and so was Lindsay, and together we got together and organized our walkout.
Okay, but other high schools in Baton Rouge, Lee High, Baton Rouge High, Scotlandville, McKinley, Baton Rouge International School, they all walked out on the same day. Was this just a coincidence then, or was there some kind of coordination? I mean, all over the country, kids walked out.
This was all in part with the national walkout, but McKinley and Lee specifically, the representatives from Baton Rouge High, we met with those two schools and just to sort of organize our ideas and our message. So we had different programs and different events happening, but it was all sort of as a collective group, what we wanted to take away from the event.
That's really neat. You actually sat down and made a plan of action with everybody,
Yeah.
and you met a couple times at the Baton Rouge Library. Was that or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really neat, and I guess the same thing happened all across the country. You know, you mentioned that you got information from some network initially, I think, because like I said, the whole thing was coordinated. It all happened the same day all over the country. So there must have been some kind of umbrella organization or central means of communication.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, they sort of initiated the idea of having the March for Our Lives. And then, to the best of my knowledge, I believe that the organizers of the Women's March, they sort of came together to help amplify this message on a national scale. And then it received the attention of celebrities and news stations and stuff, and just sort of grew and grew as it spread across the nation.
Wow. And I recall the turnout for the Women's March, and I saw the turnout in Washington, D.C., and here on last Saturday with the March for Our Lives. And if your two groups could combine, that's one heck of a force that I think this country needs, actually.
Absolutely.
Shake up some of us old white men and break the status quo, so to speak. Anyway, okay, Annie, you and Anton both spoke at the rally at your school also, right?
Yes.
I'd like to talk about some things that each of you stated in your presentation. Annie, you stated in your speech that we, the students, are here today because we want to make a difference. How would you respond to someone my age asking you, what can you do? You're just kids.
While most of us can't yet vote, we still have a voice that we can have be heard throughout our state or our nation, whatever it may be. And that was sort of the point of this, to bring together students' voices and show that what we say and what we think still matters, because we are citizens of this nation. And specifically regarding the school shootings, we're the ones being the most directly affected. So we believe that we need to have a say in what sort of legislation and in what sort of society is being cultivated.
But that's the justification for you doing it, and I agree with you, but what can you do to make change? How can you make a difference?
I mean, I would like to say that historically a lot of powerful movements have been helped by the youth and youth organized, such as the civil rights movement, such as even within our Baton Rouge community, the Alden Sterling case, a lot of the youth got out and got very active last year. And so it is our responsibility per se to go out there and to create the change that we want to see in the world.
Okay, yeah, and actually I would also add that, in my lifetime, when I was your age, the Vietnam War was forced to a head, and we ended up withdrawing because of kids. Students were protesting because the adults, they were too busy working for a living, or they supported the war, whatever, but it was the young people that drove our government to finally face the fact that we were, committing a major crime over there and wasting a bunch of American lives. What about the accusations that are being leveled at you now by politicians as well as the NRA regarding the adults? They're saying that you guys are being manipulated and brainwashed by adults.
I would like to say that they're completely unfounded, quite ridiculous, and a bit fear-mongering. And their means are to devalue our message, and I believe that that is what must not happen, and people must ignore these threats per se.
Yeah, well,
exactly.
Yeah, that's what they do, and it tells me anyway that they feel threatened now because they have young people who have energy and who have every right to be outraged and angry at their adults, at the adults in charge of things right now. You also state here, Annie, we encourage you to go out and inspire change in your local communities. Learn more about the problems we face as students, as citizens, and as people. Isn't that the crux of the whole problem? People are forming opinions about other people's lives without knowing anything about them?
So I'm not saying to form opinions without knowing about these people. I'm saying to interact directly with them. No,
I know, but you said learn more about them. You want people to learn more about the problems that you guys face as students, as citizens, and as people. And that is basically the crux of the whole problem, is it not? I mean, you guys have said, and it's not just you, I mean the whole movement, you've been saying this isn't just about guns, it's about the causes of gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to bring up, I read this great article by NPR, and they talked about approaching gun violence and school shootings as a social health problem, viewing medicine and stuff. And so what they suggested was to primarily take away guns, the main actors, and then to address mental health issues that come along with gun violence, such as stigmatization, discrimination, and just ostracization of teenagers.
Yeah, in fact, in your opening paragraph in your presentation at Baton Rouge Magnet, you said that mass shooters are usually people who feel victimized by society and its institutions, and you urge students to, quote, create a climate that undermines the tools of exclusion, and you specifically cite discrimination, bullying, and harassment. And so you're saying it along. So you guys are saying, along with getting a handle on gun ownership and how easily it is to get guns, we also should be addressing mental health issues and societal issues.
Yeah, completely. Because the problem of mass shootings are not solely based upon guns. While guns can be an effective mean, taking away guns can be an effective mean to deter mass shootings, there is still a problem with these people who are willing to go out and commit mass shootings. And so this problem does not stem from the guns itself. It stems from our societal views and what has allowed our society to get to a point where people are willing to do this.
Okay, and but from my observation, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, both of you, it seems to me our whole culture is all about exclusion, creating an us versus them type of thing. In advertising, buy our products so you don't look like that geek. You know, buy our products so you can beat them, or elect me so we can beat them. It seems like every aspect of our culture and our media is all about separating people.
Exactly. That's sort of what we were trying to highlight in this, especially in Anton's part, so we can recognize how ingrained this sort of exclusion of others, is in our society, and how we were discussing how it's sort of like we're raised with these ideas already being implanted in us, and they're so ingrained in our society. So we're trying to become more and more aware of this, because it is one of the factors leading into these gun problems.
And our speeches and what we're saying is we're trying to encourage people to address these problems through how it is ingrained to us through our educations, but also to take preventative measures today as we can do them and not wait for the next generation.
Right, and I had to write down my question here. I have a habit of forgetting stuff like that, but I want to remind the listeners, you're listening to A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. We have Annie Sheehan Dean and Anton Guevara West, who participated in the local walkout from schools to protest gun violence. Feel free to call in 343-9927, 343-9927. As far as dealing with the culture of exclusion and us versus them kind of thing, which really when I was in high school, that existed too. Everybody had their cliques. You know, there was the in crowd and the out crowd, that kind of the cool people, the geeks, you know, that kind of thing. But how, or do you have a plan for addressing that in your own high school, or where you have actual influence?
I feel like a lot of these anti-bullying or anti exclusion programs have not been very successful. And the means that we have taken to prevent these measures of discrimination, bullying, and harassment have not been successful at all. I believe that, my personal belief is that the situation could be resolved by having a more successful guidance system and to have students form interpersonal connections between their teachers. And so that way they have a chance to find somebody, even if it might not be within their peers, that they can connect to. And, to tie this back into gun violence, as I say in my speech, a lot of people who are going to shoot up schools don't empathize with the people within their schools. And so if we have a system that ties the student to the school and humanizes this institution, then we can basically prevent school shootings in a drastic measure.
Yeah, I'm the only thing you said that I'd be concerned about is making a change in your school counseling and things like that. I'm worried because, you mentioned that the previous current efforts to end bullying aren't working. Isn't that because they're being thought of and implemented by adults?
Per se. I mean, do you have anything?
I suppose partly, but also what Anton's saying is that we want to have a stronger connection between the adults, the administration in charge, and the students, so there'll be more communication and students' voices will be heard in terms of what they want as part of this support system. So just to strengthen that connection so that it will be more of a mutual relationship in which the students are benefiting based off of their ideas and their desires.
Back when I was younger, the idea came up for labor and management relations in the workplace. They would have softball games with the management playing against the laborers, just to promote goodwill and all that other stuff. And it occurred to me years later that maybe they would have been better to mix the two groups up and create teams. That way, and so maybe something like that, maybe not necessarily, a physical sport to play, but team activities that can combine both student and faculty, on the same teams.
I'd like to state that my mom's a teacher, and she is very invested in her students, but she always feels like she's lacking time, and she doesn't have enough time to do certain things. Her job is very stressful. and but she wants to form those connections with students. So it doesn't have to be a set system per se, even though that would help encapsulate it. But like, teachers are pretty invested in their students usually, and so because of this, if we had more funding and more time allocated to teachers, they could form connections with their students that humanizes these institutions.
Yes, the funding. That's we all know. I think anybody that pays attention, funding for American schools is pathetic. Just as it is for our infrastructure and everything else that's important, really. But for schools especially, yeah. I mean, the best teachers are the ones that get burned out or disgusted eventually, because, I mean, I used to see teachers over in Biloxi, Mississippi when I lived near there in a copy store on Saturday mornings copying their teaching materials because they didn't have enough to go around. You know, and that's shameful, really, in a country like ours, but that's kind of like it is. You know, a lot of people just changing. Let me see here. I'll look back here at some of your other comments, though. Yeah, that was you, Anton. I think you said that, and you already said that focusing on the gun control misses the root cause of the problem, which is the lack of empathy in our communities. Yeah. So, okay. Well, what about the Constitution, though? You know, you want to restrict access to guns, but yet people claim that the Second Amendment was so sacred, you know, or whatever, that it guarantees the right for everyone to own a gun, so we can fight the government, actually. What do you say? How do you fight that? I mean, are you guys planning on doing any research at all on the Constitution and the Second Amendment?
I mean, I think it's very important to stand within the bounds of our law. I do believe that change has to happen, though, at the same time within our law, and that our laws have to be representative of our people. Now, the Second Amendment, it was recently reinterpreted sometime during the 2000s to change the way the idea of more of a militia to an individual. And I just personally believe that it should be more upon the militia standpoint. But even then, it's kind of questionable. I feel like we must uphold our laws, but also that you have to, like, look into the Second Amendment and interpret your own meaning from it and, like, find what you're trying to say or what people are trying to say, understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, like I mentioned before the show, the first 10 amendments were proposed by people in the states who didn't like the kind of government that was created, or they wanted more assurances that certain things would be, that the federal government would be prevented from doing certain things. And that tells me that it was the states afraid of the federal power, and so the first 10 amendments really were only intended to apply to the federal government. Mm-hmm. For instance, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. It says nothing about state governments or anybody else. I mean, that was a later, you know, interpretation of the Constitution, but in reality, the first 10 amendments were written by the states to hold the federal government in check, not to hold themselves in check. You know, that's an argument I think that's worth pursuing and taking a look at that, because in my opinion, what's being said about the Second Amendment today is not accurate.
And while I'd also say I completely believe in that our constitutional freedoms, like obviously staying within the bounds of the law, and those must be protected. But at a certain point, there are regulations on all of our freedoms to protect us as citizens, as a nation, and those are necessary, in especially regarding all of these individual freedoms.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up. Everybody talks about how there can be no restrictions on speech, free speech for everybody and everything. Mm-hmm. Even if you want to stand at somebody's funeral and shout, you know, curses at the people, you know, mourning. But yet, years ago, they banned advertising for cigarettes on television. Mm-hmm. And that was because it was a public health issue. And, you know, firearms are a public health issue, obviously, you know, or the firearm violence.
Yeah, of course. I mean...
Yeah. And I was discussing with my dad with my dad. Like, we have the freedom to go where we please within this country. We can drive to whatever city, state we want to, but we can't drive as fast as we want on these roads. There are regulations to protect those around us and to protect ourselves.
Right, and to protect other people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we don't allow people to own fully automatic weapons. Mm-hmm. You know, so there are already restrictions on, you know, guns, and you know, like. A lot of times they say, well, if you start registering guns, requiring registration, that's the first step toward confiscation and then tyranny. And, how many countries elsewhere in the world have some form of gun control? And at least for the past 100 years, they haven't become tyrannies.
And I would also like to point out that the U.S. government, we can't really overthrow the U.S. government with the guns that we have. The U.S. government has some sort of drones and other things that they can use to kill us before we shoot them. So I think the idea that we can overthrow the U.S. government with our guns and the power to do that keeps the government in check is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the individual and there are people that claim that they need to remain armed so the government can't abuse them and all that, I mean, they're not trained, they're not organized. I mean, individually they may learn how to shoot well, but they're not trained, they're not put through combat scenarios. How are they going to go against an organized Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines that have tanks, cannon, like you said, and drones and all this other stuff? I mean, it's absurd, really. If we get to a point where we're fighting our government in our streets, we're toast anyway. Okay, well, anything else you want to say on that point, Anton or Annie? I'll change tack here.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. We talked a little bit earlier about who organized last Saturday's Walk for Our Lives. Okay, and you did say that it was the kids, not children, but kids, and the Women's March and other adults. Of course, adults have to be involved in such things as that because they have to be the ones to get permits and everything and get insurance, I guess, whatnot. Yeah. But how much support have you had? When you guys first announced you were going to do your walkout on the 14th, what were your parents' reactions and what were your teachers' reactions?
I'd say we've had a fairly large amount of support. All of the students involved, our parents were all in full support, and the administration as well. We sat down on multiple occasions with our principal because this was a school-sanctioned event, and we did have support from the administration and from our teachers who wanted to help while they couldn't politically participate and that they couldn't voice their own political opinions. They wanted to help us facilitate this.
Yeah, I had multiple teachers come up to me and be like, thank you for doing this, something needed to happen. And so, I mean, it's pretty clear that people feel like there's a need for change and that we have the support that we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I saw the numbers that came out, I was excited and hopeful because you guys are a powerful force. Just don't let yourselves, just make sure, I hope that more adults will contact you all and let you know that they support you because you're going to need the support. And there's a lot of it out there that you haven't even tapped yet, probably. Yeah. Which brings me to something, too. Are there any plans for organizing a national March for Our Lives type thing or anything like that? I mean, is there any plans to really, create a charitable organization or whatever, 501c3 or whatever, to get donations and really build an organization?
So far, we, as this group of students at Baton Rouge High, haven't put anything into plan. We want to hopefully hold a community forum soon, and we want to contact our senators, sit in on meetings, just make sure that we can do our best to make any sort of legislative change, and we're looking into future action, per se. Future
action. I like that. Just imagine if kids would stop doing regular kid things, kind of like the bus boycott during the Civil Rights Movement. That had an impact because it hurt people's pocketbooks. And there are entire industries that are set up just to make money off of people your age. And so that you have an economic power as well. So that's worth thinking about too, I'm sure. And civil disobedience, that's another force.
Yeah, those are some of the examples of ways we can share our voices, voice our opinions without being legally able to vote or as being children.
Yeah, well, and there's the larger perspective that you guys are the victims. You guys are the ones at risk. You're the ones who are being killed in your schools by your peers.
And we are being hurt by these school shootings. I've had friends who've come up to me and said that they feel anxious within their school's environment, and that's just not healthy. We need to have some sort of change.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably the biggest point that has the pro-gunners scared, because this is embarrassing. It's shameful that it has to be, had to come to this point, but this is something that they're going to have a hard time fighting, except with the means that they're trying already, delegitimizing it. or coming right out and mocking the students, telling them their time would be better spent learning CPR. That was Senator Rick Santorum of Pennsylvania. And of course, there was that doctored picture of Emma Gonzalez tearing up the Constitution. Did you seen that?
Yeah.
It was on Facebook. There's somebody. There's a cartoonist that depicted David Hogg, who spoke at the rally in Washington, as an assault rifle wielded by CNN and loaded with Marxism. So you got that coming at you too. Your future, you're going to be Marxist. Yeah, classy, right? So 60s, you know, Marxism, socialism.
I feel like in a way it almost helps to strengthen our own platform as kids when it's like these adults are turning to like the lowest means to mock us.
And if you were to mock them back for those tactics, that would be really embarrassing for them.
Yeah.
You know, because it is ridiculous. I mean, I could call them ridiculous, and they'll see me as an equal, and they'll say, well, you know, you're just a boob. But when young kids are pointing out that kind of stuff,
They're kind of hard not to mock.
that kind of hard what?
Not to mock.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. Not because I wouldn't have wanted to, but it's more powerful, again, coming from a young person, because you guys got all the right things on your side right now. And I really do hope that a lot more people come out and help you.
I want to speak on how entrenched, like, a lot of our legislation has become, though, because of non-governmental organizations like the NRA or interest groups. All of these organizations are so steeply entrenched against having legislation that has any change for or any sort of gun reform. And, like, it's our job to help fight these organizations which are so entrenched against change and representing the people.
Yes, and with the money, they can influence politicians, of course. And after the Parkland shootings, a lot of publicity came out about all the different politicians and how much money they get from the NRA. And let's face it, they are really nothing more than a lobbyist for the gun industry. No keeping secrets. No keeping. Can you?
I don't remember. You have to talk. Annie has to talk.
Oh,
What are you talking about?
The documentary that we watched in Mr. Peaks. Well, you talk about it.
I don't know what you're asking me to say.
say talk. Feel free to talk.
After the shooting, remember how they were trying to get the change for the legislation? Can you talk about that really quickly? No, just talk about it.
Well, what I was taking sort of what from Anton was saying earlier is how with these non-governmental organizations, the automatic reaction is to shut us down, and that because we watched this documentary on the NRA and the parents after the shooting at Sandy Hook and how they were so aghast at how this legislation would be shut down, because I feel like, I mean, I don't want to speak for people, but like the NRA members and the spokespeople for that, their automatic reaction is like without even listening to the arguments and listening to our personal like what our opinions and what we have to say, is just to shut it down because they don't want to actually sort of open up a platform, a dialogue to speak on this.
They don't even want a discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you know, and we have a few minutes anyway. On the idea of this public discussions about the issues that cause all this violence, or that are bringing this violence about, nobody's talking about our broken institutions. Nobody's talking about the divisiveness. I mean, people cry out about Trump and the things he says that are divisive and all that, but nobody's acknowledging, like we all, talked about earlier tonight, that it's in our culture. There's all these things. I mean, of course, to get elected, you have to engage in divisive tactics. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't see that discussion happening anywhere in the public anyway, among our leaders, and that needs to come out too. It's not just the lobbyists and the gun issues and all that, and their need and desire to shut down all discussion. Which you're right, that's what they want to do. Is just they want to nip it in the bud. They don't want any reasonable voices to get out there.
Mm-hmm. And because they have so much power, they're able to continue to curtail possible discussions.
Yes, there's a lot of power out there, but that's one reason why they demonized Saul Alinsky a few years back on Fox News and all that, because he used to go around organizing the poorer communities and the downtrodden and tell them, look, there are two sources of power in America, money and numbers. Mm-hmm. And you guys would have the numbers, I'm convinced, combined with the women's movement, the Women's March, and also sensible guys like me, you know. I mean, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of support out there. You know, I haven't met anybody yet that is opposed to what you're doing.
Yeah, we're doing our best to take advantage of that and continue facilitating change.
You know, there definitely are people who are opposed to what we're doing. In fact, whenever we held our walkout at Baton Rouge High, we had someone come up and speak and basically was like, yeah, we shouldn't do this. This is bad. And I feel like it's important to recognize their voice and, like, listen to arguments and not to demonize those people per se. But it's also important to look at this issue as the ones that are killing people and how, like, there's definitely some sort of change that needs to happen.
Did anybody ask this person that spoke why they felt that way?
No, per se. I mean, we just, like, we're like, he should go up because we need to have an alternative voice. We need to have
Right.
all
Yeah, but it
sorts
might
of
have been a good
voices
idea to maybe talk with him afterwards or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
instead of just shunning him and, you know,
I
saying,
mean, we didn't really shun him. We were like, you should go up and speak, and then whatever you say, like, we'll just see how people react, and then we'll just continue going. with
yeah,
our program.
well, it's good that you encourage the person to get up there and talk. I mean, that is important.
Yeah.
But maybe a second step would be to take, you know, go to him now and say, I'm assuming it's a guy, but and just say, you know, well, why do you feel that way? You know, just at least you get out there and talk to people. Anyway, it looks like we're out of time. You've been listening to Wayne Parker on A Pause for Thought with Annie Sheehan Dean and Anton Guevara West from Baton Rouge Magnet High School, talking about the student walkout and the March for Our Lives. I thank you very much for coming in and talking.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And you all have a good night. We got to go.